of divisions are there. Okay, so this is an important aspect of historical understanding. Why this time has been divided in various segments: ancient, medieval, modern, contemporary. So there's a whole package. This is the kind of packaging of history which is there before us. Okay, so this on this aspect we will discuss in detail. Then second aspect would be the sources of history. So what are the sources of history? How these sources help us in formulation of historical concepts, and how these sources, how we use these sources. Okay, and there are different sources in different sections of history. Like for ancient there is a different sources, for medieval there is a different sources, and for modern history there is different sources. And sometimes questions are directly asked directly from these sources. Okay, so it is very important for all the aspirants to understand the sources, what the various kinds of sources are there, how these sources are variables in history. It is very important. So at the second level, we are going to discuss about the historical sources. And third will be the various kinds of historical writings. How these historical writings evolved through the ages, like the age of antiquity, then medieval age, then age of enlightenment, okay, then age of modern historical writing. So these are the different parts in our historical writing. So if we'll understand all these aspects in holistic way, then there will be a certain point where we will have the clear-cut idea about our history. So this is going to be happening in today's class. I hope you all are ready. I am very much excited and I am too much ready for this discussion, because I like this topic. Because in the last class there were several students those who are saying that, sir, we need some kind of this kind of lectures on historiography or historical understanding. So let's begin about this first aspect. The first aspect is the division of time, like ancient, medieval, and modern. Why it is important? Earlier there was in various university PhD entrance exams, there was a question that either you are agree or not with this segmentary division of history, like ancient, medieval, modern, and how these divisions evolved through the time. Okay, so this is an old approach to look into the history as a segmentary, as a sex, as a sections, in the sections like ancient, medieval, modern. Like there is no connection between each of them, because they are representing a different time. There is different period. Obviously, there is a chronology in it. कि ancient के बाद medieval, then उसके बाद modern, then उसके बाद contemporary. So there is a chronology in it, but this segmentary section of history for a long time was in a practice in various universities, like till 1950s or 60s, until or unless there was an evolution of new kind of historical writings. So for a learner, for a beginner, it is good. But when you jump or when you come into the historical research or in the field of research, then it is not important as much for you, because all history is connected with well connected with each other. We cannot pinpoint from this period or this date the the ancient period was over and the medieval ages came. So there is a very difficulty. There is a difficulty in pinpointing the time of transformation, when it exactly happened, and that is why all history is connected. At one aspect, it is good to have. It helps us to divide this long history in a small part for study. But if you come into research, it is very difficult to point out um, the, 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 the boundary between ancient and medieval and modern. So that is why it is little bit problematic, and that is why there are the new sections evolved through the time, through the ages. And what are these? Like early medieval or late medieval, okay, or pre-modern, okay, or post-modern. These are some topics, or these are some new phrases which have evolved through the time to give a clear-cut idea about the transition. So there's a two aspect in it. First is that it's okay to have this kind of division in history, but when it comes to uh, understanding about the idea of transformation, then we need these kind of understanding, like early medieval, pre-modern, post-modern. These kind of segmentary aspects of history have evolved through the ages. Okay, so there is a period of time. There is a long period of time we have divided in ancient, medieval, modern, and consequently also there is some other aspects in between them which are called as the junction points. Okay, the time of or the ages of transformations between ancient to medieval and medieval to modern and modern to contemporary. So it is very important, and you all should keep in your mind that there is a linearity. There should be a linearity in history. Okay, segmentary history is over. There should be linearity in history, and that is the very important concept. And you should you should remember this point in your yourself for your exam and also for your understanding. Now, the second aspect, sources of history. This is very important. Okay, because it makes you clear about the how we are extracting history from the sources. So let me tell you one thing. What are the sources? So any kind of object, like it could be it could be artifacts, documents, inscriptions, letters, anything from where you extract the first hand information about any kind of historical event. That is historical sources. Okay, so that is historical sources. But there is a difference in ancient Wala historical sources, medieval historical sources, and modern historical sources. Let me clear you first. For ancient students or for ancient scholars, the sources are like inscriptions, okay, stone inscriptions, some kind of artifacts or archaeological sites, coins, very important, or ancient texts for Indians like Ramayana Mahabharata, okay, or any or Vedas. These are the sources from which we get some kind of historical idea. So for ancient students, there is a whole section of different kind of historical sources. For medieval, for those who do something in medieval history, for them historical sources are like the, the medieval ages books, or the autobiography by any scholar or any king, okay, or important letters, important places. Okay, so these are some kind of medieval history sources. And for modern, there are obviously there is a letters, there is a personal communication, there is a government communication, there is a archives material. In Delhi, there is an archive center, okay, where all the letters and documentations by the government have been collected for historical understanding. So there is a set of sources for every section of historical understanding. But tell me now, I'm going to tell you the other aspect. That is how many kind of historical sources are there. So there is two kind of historical sources. It is very important on the point from examination perspective. The first kind of historical sources is primary source, and there is a secondary source. There is a two kind of source in history: primary source and secondary source. So what is primary source? Primary source is the first authentic information from which it is coming, like like Ramayana, Mahabharata, inscriptions, or letters. It means there is no interpolation. Okay, there is no interpretation. Two things are very important: interpolation and interpretation. In the primary source, there is no interpretation, there is no interpolation. It is the as it is, first hand information which is coming from anywhere. That is the primary source. And what is the same secondary source? Secondary source is all the books written upon that primary source with their own interpretation, with their own interpolation. Interpolation means, it means there is always some kind of scope to put the author's view into it. That is interpolation. And interpretation is that with the time and with the situation and with the socio-political aspects, all the reader and authors interpret the sources according to them. That is interpretation. So in the primary source, there is no interpretation, there is no interpolation. That is the first information for history. And in the secondary source, all the books written on that particular subject or in this primary source, the primary source, that is the secondary source. So it should be very clear. And in exams, it is being asked various times that how you understand primary source and what are the secondary source. So source is very important. As I said, in ancient time, for ancient time, there is a different kind of set of sources. For medieval, different set of sources. Let me tell you very important information. Like at the age of antiquity, or at the time of Plato and Aristotle, 326 BC, when Alexander advent to India, and there was a war between the Indian king and Alexander. So these kind of historical events was actually recorded with the with foreign texts. In India, there is no evidence that Alexander came to India. That is very interesting. But all the Western sources are saying that actually Alexander invaded India. So that is the problem of sources. So textual sources are very important because all history is being recorded in the textual sources. Because in text we record dates, events, and places, and politics behind the events. That is very important. So textual sources are very important. Like any textual sources, or I said like letters or books or biography, autobiography, anything which is there in the light of sun. That is very important. So I discussed the sources of history in this part. Now, the various kinds of historical writings. This is the now we are jumping into the topic which is called as the historiography. So it is very important. Very important means first two aspects where you understand you learn about the time and sources. Now we are coming into the aspect of historical writing and historiography, like how this historiography evolved, how we perceived this historical understanding. Okay, so what are the different kinds of historiography is there for us? Like first kind of in historiography, there is a first aspect that is the antiquity, like the old tradition. In old tradition, we have Greek and Roman aspects of historical writings. Like at the time of Plato and Aristotle, they were the first who. This is the aspect which I'm taking from the Western. Basically, this is an Western approach. The idea of historiography in itself is a Western approach. So we'll have to begin from that point. That is antiquity or European antiquity, from where there's a Greek and Romans, those who are the first people, those who actually chronologically documented their events and places and happenings. And that is why that were being considered as the first authentic uh, history writing that actually began in the world. So these are the first, Greeks and Romans. Then it comes to the medieval ages, Renaissance. Like what happened at the time of Renaissance? Keep all the happenings like politics, sociopolitics, economics, and everything was being judged in the light of reasons. So enlightenment is considered as the age of reasons. So when all the historians and all the writers and all the mm, influential people were actually trying to interpret the situation on the basis or on the ground of reason, so this period was called as the medieval age of Renaissance. And from this is the we can consider this as the initial point of scientific history writing. This is very important. Why I'm saying scientific history writing? Because earlier there was a history writing which was basically focused on the kingdoms, okay, some important royal families, okay. So it means it was not history was not for public. It was for the royal persons. It was for the state. So these kind of history writing was there. But after Renaissance or after the Age of Reasons, all the history writings were being judged through the reasons. And this is very important because this was the turning point in history writing. So Renaissance is a very important aspect because Renaissance actually ignited some influential minds of that time, and that was like Voltaire, David Hume, and Edward Gibbon. Voltaire, David Hume, and Edward Gibbon. These were some influential minds, those who were actually inspired by Renaissance, and this kind of reasoning is very much visible in their writings. So Voltaire comes first, and then David Hume and Edward Gibbon. These were some first persons who actually constructed the base of history for scientific history writing. They have written very influential books at that time. Those who are being considered as the Bible of history. Okay, so let me tell you some examples of um, Voltaire. Okay, so uh, Why Voltaire is very important? Because he did not go into the biographies of royal families or like kings and queens. He actually wrote two important book, The Age of Louis and the essays on customs and spirit of nations. Why this is important? Because now they are trying to see the society. That is very important. So Voltaire was the first person who actually through historical writing tried to understand, he was trying to understand the society or as a state. So he is very important for us in this historical understanding. Then David Hume. David Hume was the first person who actually wrote the history of England, whole England. Okay, where there is a representation of people also. So David Hume was the first person who wrote the history of England in a very wider way, in a very big way. And so these are some important scholars to actually uh, helped us or in the transformation of historical writing. Now, the most important person in all history writing, because what today we are practicing in history writing is the source-based history writing. It means if you don't have sources like primary source or secondary source, you cannot write history, any kind of history, because nobody will believe you. Because according to E.H. Carr, these sources are the tools or the objectives through which you derive your historical understanding or you interpret your historical understanding. In this way, Ranke was the first person. Ranke was the first person who actually uh, given the perspective to write history on the basis of sources. Okay, so Ranke was the first person, or we considered as the Germany was the place, or especially the University of Gothenburg, Göttingen. Germany is the first place or the country where at the University of Göttingen, this Ranke was a professor. So he actually evolved this trend of source-based history writing. So today we are actually practicing this history writing, which is source-based history writing. So Ranke is very important person. If you if you want to understand more about Ranke's philosophy and his approaches towards history, so you just Google it about Ranke and history, and you will find a lot of reading about it. Okay, so now Germany, after Germany, there is a France. In France, there was a school which is called as the Analysis School. Analysis School is the very important historiographical stage in our understanding of history as a whole, in a holistic way, in a modern way. Why? Because this Analysis School actually challenged the old tradition of history. So, for first, Ranke actually changed the approach of history, and now the Annals, the French Annals, are giving us the transformation into history writing. Which kind of transformation history writing? They are saying the old techniques and old components of history is not being valid for a long time. Why? Because the aspects of society, economy, politics, geography, all these cannot be taken for granted and they cannot be taken aloof for a long time for the history writing. If you are trying to understand history writing, if you are trying to write a history, then you have to include all these parts, all these components: society, climate, geography, politics, economy, order. All this has to be has to be as a part of history. And this is the argument of Analysis School. So it is very important to understand Analysis School. It is not that much complicated. So I think you should go and read about Analysis School, that why it is important and what are the perspectives or objectives on which they are working at that time in France. So after Germany, there is a French people, those who came with the Analysis School, and now the Marxist historiography. This is very interesting. Marxist historiography. Why Marxist historiography is very important? Because the Marxist actually they were trying to see the changes from the below, from the bottom. Because earlier, all the scholars and all the historical schools were actually trying to interpret and see the society from top to bottom, from above to below. Now this approach was actually changed completely to the Marxist historical history writing, and that is why it is as because they were trying to interpret the society. They were trying to see the society from the below. When you see the society from below, then you find there is a participation of people or masses. Okay, so actually the Marxist historians were trying to see the society from below. They were writing history for the people's history. Actually they were writing history for peoples, like for the farmers, for peasants, for women, for labor, or these kind of approach was basically the Marxist approach, where they actually criticize the approach of a state or kingdom or ruling class. So that is very interesting. You can also you should look at, in this aspect, that why Marxist historiography has a strong impact in our recent historical trend. And I should also mention especially about the Mark Bloch and Eric Hobsbawm. These are the these are the people, those who actually change the historical history writing. Mark Bloch and Eric Hobsbawm. Sometimes these names came in exams, that there would be some phrase, and you will have to identify that what, either it is from which scholar or what he is trying to say in his argument. And if it is analysis school, or if it is peasant movement, or if it is the early England history, then you must know something about Eric Hobsbawm and Mark Bloch. Mark Bloch basically gives us an idea about the historian's craft, like how these historians are arranging their tools, or the ingredients of history, and then Eric Hobsbawm take to the people, like how it is important for people and how we can help people through these approach. Okay, so it now Marxist historiography is over. Now biography. So there was a time when biography evolved as a historical writing. That in each age and each time, like each political leader or each great leader always came with the biography. And biography, like in recent times, if you see, there is a biography, a range of biography for great leaders, for modern leaders, from Gandhi to Nelson Mandela, or from anybody. So it helps us out that how they were looking into their time, and what we can take from them. So biography is also an important trend as a history writing for us. Then, okay. So these are some aspects. These are some big aspects from where we were trying to look into the idea of history writing. Now I'm going to tell you how we can approach into these history writings. Okay. So let me tell you one thing. Debate and readings in historical method. Very important. What are the debates in historical methods, and what are essential readings to understand these debates in historical methods? So there is a three book by Mark Bloch, as I said. Mark Bloch की जो book है उसका नाम है The Historian's Craft, and there is a Edward Said about Orientalism. So these are some historical approach which are very recent for us, and we should have some kind of idea about that. So you must go with these two books, Mark Bloch, The Historian's Craft, or Edward Said ki Orientalism. And as I always discuss and mention about E.H. Carr, which is the Bible for all the historians, that you must go through E.H. Carr for what is history. Now, the second aspect, the reading text on history and raise issues on methods. What are the texts? How we should see the text? Like, suppose a person wish to work on Ramayana, or suppose a person wish to work on any classic book from the historical point of view, then how, and then what are the ways through which he can extract history from it? Like, there are people, those who are working on Ramayana or Mahabharata, and they are taking out the economical aspect, the political aspect, the social aspect, okay, the people's aspect. So how within the text we can go into a particular aspect or gender issues? So there are various topics, or there is a various lenses through it we can have an understanding of history. So textual understanding is very important, as I'm saying. So for that, Representing Others by B.D. Chattopadhyay, that is very important. And Romila Thapar ki Somnath, The Many Voices of History. And also there's a Subramanyam Sanjay Veluchari Narayan Rao and David Sulman, The Texture of Time. These are some important and essential books where you will get help to look into the idea of text, that how they have used text, and like Romila Thapar have used various texts to see the this Somnath debate. And obviously she has taken a different point of view, which is not, I don't consider that is very much correct. But obviously she has used various texts to build her thoughts. So this is very important. Now, uh, the key historical categories, like how there are various categories in history through which we can go for our research, or through which we can have some kind of a new approach in history. Not exactly new, but these are some settled or set ideas which will be always there for us, like gender, class, like gender history. The gender history is evolving right now very much in all universities, in all departments. In sociology, you will find gender history. In political science, there is a gender history. In history, obviously, there is a gender history. Then class. Class is very important because all socio-political dimension of history writing is actually based on class. That how there's a, like for some people there's a class struggle. For some people, like some people came with the idea that how we can have balance with class, different class, why classes is important. Then Marxist class, okay. Then how the nationalist negotiated with the class. So class is very important aspect to look into the history. Now there is a new trend which is called as the environmental history. Mahesh Rangarajan, very famous person who has some important books in this field, environmental history. Then nation and nationalism. There is a lot of writings after World War II, and after the rise of this Germany and Russia. So how this nation and the idea of nationalism has given the way for the new world or the new world order. So it is important to look the various aspects from the nation's point of view, that how nations evolved, how nations struggled, and how nations are important, and what happened after the globalization. That is important aspect in new historical approach. And obviously the community is the last and important. Like like there in world history, there is a various ethnic communities, and how their history haven't get any place all over the world. These small tribal communities or ethnic communities. So why there is a new trend which is called as the oral history is being evolved. So this is very important. So why it is important? Because they don't have the textual sources. The tribal people or or the ethnic people or the other communities, those who are not in mainstream, they do not have the textual sources. So from where we can derive their history? That is a big challenge. So from their point of view, the next trend which evolved in historical writing and historiography, that is the oral history. Like if there are the Gonds in the central India, okay, or if there is any community or tribal community in northeast, so how then they will drive their history? How they will search their history? So they will search their history from oral tradition. What is oral tradition? Oral tradition is the old songs, old stories, old myths which are there in their society for a long time. We can take history out of these sources. So we cannot taken for granted all these important aspects which are there, like folk songs, like a folk myths. Earlier, there was not considered by the historians because they believe that because of impact of time, there could be the authenticity of these kind of sources could be not too much strong. The changes are very like we cannot protect these oral tradition from the changes. It means the change will come due to the time, because these are the not textual sources. So oral history should be considered as the alternative history for the marginalized people, for the tribal people, or for the people, those who are not in mainstream. So it is very important. Oral history or oral tradition. Now, okay. Hmm. You all should be very much aware about the changes in social structure, that how social structure changed with the time. Because all these schools and all these scholars are actually trying to see the change in the social structure. So social structure should be always in your mind, that how the social structure is taking place. Because for the antiquity, for the scholars of antiquity, the social structure is basically being changed by the state and society and the ruling class. For the analysis school, it is being changed because the various derivatives. For the Marxist, it is getting changed because of the because the what I say, mm, what we call it. Sorry, I'm forgetting it. The the production mode of production is being changed. For Marxist, it is the mode of production. Okay. So for all the historical approaches, it is very important. The change in the social structure. So keep in mind the change in social structure. That is very important. Now, colonialism, very important aspect. Because colonial history writing is the most defected history writing in the world. Because what they have done, the colonial rulers, when they came for the trade, okay, and when they settled as the ruler of that country, like in India, how they have distorted and how they have brought their interpretation on our history. So colonial interpretation and colonial historiography as is an important aspect in historical writing. Why? Because they interpreted the whole Indian history or the whole Chinese history or the Spanish history in their point of view. The superiority of white men or the Britishers or the colonial understanding or what we call the white man burdens. So it is very important to have some idea about this colonial understanding of history writing. Okay. Now there is a um, now there is a change in history writing. These changes are like there is a change in the agrarian history writing. Now people are working on agrarian history, women's history, history of emotions, history of pain. So now there is a new paradigm of history writing which is coming, and for that there is a not a, the various kinds of historical sources are being used. Sometimes it are textual, and sometimes it is oral, and sometimes it is like a personal experience. In recent time, the personal experience is also being considered as the effective uh, historical source. You cannot deny the experience of a person. Okay, so these are some important aspects in history writing, and I have also discussed some important books, which is very important for in this approach. So I think this is the place where I should stop my lecture, because it is going to be too much heavy for you, because I have discussed a lot of things in a very short period. So if you have any questions regarding what I have said in all this lecture, questions are welcome. And it is going to be 10:40, so almost I have given a lecture about 40 minutes. So let we have 15 minutes of question answer. Any questions? I think there's no questions. So I will just summarize in 10 minutes what I was trying to argue in my lecture. What I'm trying to argue in my lecture is that if you have understanding on time, if you have understanding on sources, and if you have understanding on historiography, how the historiography evolved or developed through the ages. In these three understandings, it is going to be help you out in your exam, in your research proposal, which is the second aspect for all PhD scholars or PhD aspirants, because after clearing the written exam, you will have to prepare a research proposal. And when you will prepare for research proposal, all what I have discussed in this lecture, it is going to help you out in your research proposal, because you will have to consider all the aspects when you are trying to approach for a new history writing. What is research proposal? Research proposal is basically a new history writing which is going to be proposed at a center, at a department. Okay, so it is very important. You cannot deny the aspect or importance of history writing or historical understanding, or the methods. And very important thing, data. Like in other historical methods, or sorry, in other methods classes or research methods classes, data is very important, but particularly for like political science and sociology, geography. But in history, we do not consider data. Like for modern history, obviously data is important, but we call them as a source, and uh, we cannot be dependent solely on particular kind of data. For example, for example, like we have to cross check if you are working on ancient history or medieval history or even in modern history, then always you will have to check your data, because your data is always impacted by the interpretation or the miscalculation. For example, a data is being given at the text of Kalidas, or if there is a mention of anything in the text of Kalidas, then at that particular time, is there another text which is also mentioning the same thing? अगर ऐसा है, then you can trust on that. But it is if other texts are not saying the same argument or same data, or it is not going with the argument what have Kalidas has wrote in his book, then you will have to say that it is only there. It is not mentioned by others. So there is always a comparison in historical data. So comparison is very important, because it is a way of checking it out, that either it is correct or not. Because for modern data, for contemporary data, there is a no doubt. Like there is a government data, you can rely upon them. But if you are working on ancient and medieval period, so it is difficult that how many people were killed in that particular war. Okay, how what was the number of their army? In these kind of data, you cannot rely upon one particular source. You need various sources, and you have to cross verify. So this is a very important difference in other departments or other subjects data analysis and historical data analysis. It is very important. You should keep in mind, this is very important aspect. So today I discussed in a detail that how you should look about the time, and time is why time is important, and then various kind of sources. For example, when I'm saying sources, so how this autobiography become a very important kind of sources after Second World War. It is very important that how autobiography, it is very important aspect within the sources, that in various universities they have asked us how you considered the autobiography as a important means of source in historical writing. Like there's a very famous book which is written by Anne Frank. Anne Frank. In the Nazi Germany, there was a small girl, and her name was Anne Frank, and she was around 14, sorry, 16 or 17 year age, and she has a diary. She was maintaining a diary when she was staying in ghettos. So after her death and after the end of this war, her book came as an important historical source. So each and everything which have some kind of value of socio-political interpretation becomes a historical source after some time. For example, like all the government archives are now important source of historical analysis. Like the communication of letters between Subhash Chandra Bose and Gandhi, they could also be considered as the important historical tools to understand the equation or socio-political condition at that time in country. So these are important aspects. It is the historian's mind, it is the researcher's mind, that that how he or she is extracting history out of the sources. And this process is called as the historiography. Thank you so much for being with me uh, in this Tuesday morning, and I'm really happy to share my this lecture with all you, and I'm thankful to ABVP JNU who is bestowing his love upon me and giving me such opportunity to connect with the aspirants. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you
अगर
so much, Dr. Umesh sir, for
जी जी
giving your valuable time from your busy schedule. We have requested you in a short duration, and you accepted our proposal to take a class. Thank you so much for your guidance and support. And we are very hopeful that the student must have been benefited by your lecture. And we are looking forward for your guidance throughout our entrance examination process. Thank you so much for your time.
thank you Manish, thank you so much.
So this class is ended over here. You are requested to join another session on 12 noon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much everyone. All the best.